You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Mangia, mangia, mia diletta sposa. Devi rinforzarti. Mangia, devi rinforzarti per la notte d'amore che ci attende. Non c'è nulla di peggio che un alito privo di alcun odore.
Eva. Eva, non posso, Eva.
Ho fiorito la Madonna.
Welcome back to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. I'm Annie Rose Malamet, and today I'm joined by JB Brager. Right? I said your name right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have a lot of anxiety about pronouncing people's names correctly. And they're joining me today to talk about the infamous film Salo. JB, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're about?
Sure. So I am a history teacher and a comics artist, and I am a member of the editorial collective for a gay communist magazine called Pinko. I do a lot of stuff. I have my hands in a lot of pots, I guess. Who I am, I mean, at my core, I am a tiny dog parent. That's my full identity.
Great.
That's it. That's all you need to know about. Yeah. So a big part of the area of history that I study is histories of fascism and genocide, which comes into play with this film that we're talking about today.
Does it ever? Absolutely. So this is a really intense movie. A lot of people probably haven't even seen it, but have definitely, if you're into cult films or horror films, have seen or have heard of it. It's on a lot of like most controversial films of all time, or like most horrifying films of all time.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that it's also in the Criterion collection.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
you know, in the Venn diagram of, you know, people who are trying to watch the entire Criterion collection and people who want to watch torture porn, it's right there in the middle.
Yes. So, and you know, I fall into that category for sure. Why did you pick Salo? I mean, you've kind of said how it relates to your interests. I mean, when did you first see this, and how did you feel about it when you saw it?
Yeah, I came to Salo, and the subtitle of the film is 120 Days of Sodom, a little bit late in my film watching history. So I didn't watch it until I was a few years into my PhD program. And I was super interested in Nazi exploitation films, so films like The Night Porter and Ilse She-Wolf of the SS. And I also just, in terms of my film, in terms of my scholarship, I was interested in those films. And in terms of my film interest, I love like queer cinema. I love Fassbinder's Corel. I love like Fellini, you know, like Derek Jarman. And Salo just kept kind of coming up in a lot of my reading about all of these other films that I loved. And so I was like, okay, I have to see this. And I was I had university library access. So I went and got the Criterion Collection edition from the library, and, you know, popped it into my laptop DVD player. And and I was pretty enthralled. Like I kind of thought it was going to be sexy, which was another motivation to watch it.
Me
I was
too.
like, all right,
Yeah.
yeah. And there's these moments like where you're like, all right, okay, I can get into this, and then
Yeah.
it's like, no, stop, no.
No, anytime you feel like that, the movie intentionally disgusts you again.
No, there's no relief. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it really stuck with me. I, as someone who both like intellectually and culturally and personally is interested in like the eroticization of things that are dark or painful or little weird. This movie like really exceeded some of my limits, and so it has stuck with me for a long time because of that. And I think we've been talking about this film for a long time.
Yeah.
And when we first started, or when we first discussed talking about Salo for the podcast, I think I was just like, oh, what's a film that people wouldn't have heard a lot about that I think people should hear about. And then, kind of serendipitously as we've, figured out our schedules and like finally gotten to talk to each other, it feels like exceptionally relevant in this moment because of all of not that resurgent fascism wasn't an issue before like the last few weeks, but particularly the way that right-wing movements are kind of enacting violence, particularly in Chile and Bolivia right now. It feels really relevant in these interesting ways that we can talk about in terms of some of the weird historical connections, particularly between Chile and Italy. I don't know.
That's a great point. Yeah, I would love to dive into all of that. So, on my end, I had been reading about this film for a really long time on like message boards, MySpace message boards, forums for people who are really into art house and particularly like obscure horror.
Mm-hmm.
And this was always one of those that was mentioned, and I had seen images from it, but I had never watched it. And then I finally watched it. I checked it out of the library at my college, and I watched it on a first date.
Oh, perfect.
Perfect, yeah. And they were horrified and left my dorm room in complete horror. And that was the first time I saw it. And people have really strong reactions to this movie. Like, I do want to preface this episode. I think a lot of people listen to this podcast who haven't actually seen the movies that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to preface this by saying that, like, anything you can think of that is horrible is in this movie. Like,
It's
pretty much.
It definitely, I wouldn't say it's exhaustive, but it definitely hits a lot of markers.
Yeah. And if you have a hard time hearing about any of that, especially about the sexual abuse of minors, then this is maybe not one that you should listen to. Anyway, I don't usually give content warnings on the podcast because I figure if you're listening to this, then you have an interest in talking about things that are hard to talk about. But I did want to give it with this movie because it is quite extreme for many people, even people who like subversive film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the whole conceit of the film is the content warning, like.
Right. Sorry, could you repeat that? You went out a little bit.
Oh, I just said like the whole conceit of the film like warrants a content warning. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the entire setup. So the movie's from 1975. It was directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini. A bit on Pasolini. He was an Italian film director, poet, writer, general intellectual, and he remains a controversial personality in Italy due to his blunt style and his exploration of taboo sexual matters. He is a hugely important figure in European literature and cinema. And he was murdered. That's how he died. And he was murdered right before the release of this film. And I really love Pasolini's films, but I actually haven't really read his poetry or other writing. Have you?
I read a little bit of his poetry while I was preparing to talk about Salo. And I think I tweeted at you about one of his, it's a line from one of his poems that is quite famous because, you know, his politics were also something that people were very heavily invested in, particularly because Salo, you know, is this, he engages with fascism in this really interesting way. And he wrote a lot of poetry that that contained really complex like political ideology and affiliations. And it is, you know, it is really beautiful. I don't speak Italian, and it sounds much better in Italian, but yeah, you know, I would say he's a good poet.
How would you describe his politics?
So he was a leftist. Yeah. So he was pretty openly gay. He grew up under fascism in Italy. He, you know, experienced a lot of violence as a child. His older brother was murdered by fascists. And his brother was like a anti-fascist fighter killed in 1945. And yeah, his politics were pretty largely defined by class solidarity. He, you know, so some of the like controversial politic that people sort of criticized him for was that he seemed to not be supporting like the student movement of like 68, you know, the kind of like general like uprisings that were happening in the late 60s in Italy as everywhere. And it wasn't that he wasn't supporting, you know, this like leftist student uprising. It's that he was like, these are the children of the bourgeoisie, and I have sympathy for the ways in which the children of the poor are forced into the military and the police. And you know, they're forced into these roles of violence and opposition because that's what happens, right?
Right.
And so, you know, for him there was like a lot of pain in seeing like the people who should rightfully be at, you know, at the vanguard of the revolution being counter-revolutionary because of the way that class works under, you know, entrenched capitalism globally.
Thank you for that summary. I mean, his politics are obviously really, really important to this film.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that actually the missing piece for me that I don't know a lot about is his relationship to women. And yes. I think that's going to be really, you know, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, because he was a gay man.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to erase the fact that he was a pederast. Like, he did have a relationship with an underage boy. Mm-hmm. So, you know, like, all this stuff is really complicated. He was murdered, like I said, right before the release of the film. He was run over several times with a car. And a 17-year-old boy confessed to the murder, but he recanted in 2005. And he said actually that 3 men murdered Pasolini, and it is thought that perhaps his death might be linked to Salo. because apparently some of the rolls of film were stolen. And some people think that an extortionist who was, maybe had some political friction with Pasolini was the one who murdered him.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mystery shrouding his death. Like, people blame the mafia, but I think that certainly there would have been a number of people who would have not minded him being dead.
Right. Oh, and to your point about his relationship with women, I actually do have a quote here from, hold on, I want to get the full citation here. An interview with Pasolini on set when he was filming Salo, and it's from Film Quarterly. And he said to the interviewer, "Liberty in heterosexual relationships has become obligatory. That liberty is a form of exploitation, a dictatorship of conformity. The couple has become an obsession, an incubus. Young people feel they must couple off. This is also a misuse of sex, and it is also, like in de Sade, a misuse in the service of power and of the exploitation of the human body. The body is forced, sold into a position which dehumanizes its soul." So that's how he feels about heterosexuality.
Yeah, because he's definitely, that forcing, I would extrapolate that he's thinking of, men being forced into that position.
Yes.
Not
women. Yeah. So I think, and this film, like, there is a lot of misogyny in this film, and it's hard to parse out sometimes whether that is part of the overall message about exploitation of power, or if that is Pasolini's misogyny.
Yeah. This is definitely one of those films where in every scene it's like, okay, is this part of the satire, or is this Pasolini oozing in with his own belief systems? And there's so many layers to that, because first of all, like Salo, it's based on a book by Marquis de Sade, so
yes.
There is source material which he is pretty heavily departs from, but also is very faithful to in a lot of ways. And then there's this layer of political and social critique. And then also there's the context of, like, he did grow up under fascism, where, like, literally there was, like, a very intense gendered structure to fascist Italy. They had a bachelor tax and a war for births. Like
I
it was
did not
like
know that.
Yeah, it was like mandatory to get married and have children, like, for the state.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense that he feels that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, even outside of the history of fascism, Italy is a super Catholic country.
Right.
There's a lot of factors shaping his views, not just of heterosexual relationships, but also of women.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So like you were saying, Salo is a loose adaptation of the unfinished Marquis de Sade book, 120 Days of Sodom, which Sade wrote while imprisoned. That book is about a bunch of upper class men and women who kidnap a bunch of children and take them to a secluded mansion and sexually abuse them. So, making anything based on the work of the Marquis de Sade is really difficult. A lot of people, they say when they first saw this movie that they saw it because they couldn't imagine any of that book being committed to the screen. So like we were saying, the film explores themes of political corruption, capitalism, nihilism, morality, exploitation, and sadism and fascism. So a lot going on there.
So
Uh,
many things.
it premiered at the Paris Film Festival on November 23rd, 1975, and it had a brief theatrical run in Italy before being banned, and it was released in the US in 1977. And because it depicts young people being subjected to graphic violence, it's been controversial to this day, and was only recently unbanned in Australia. So it's one of those really famous like banned films, censored, whatever. So anything else? Oh, the production of it was unusual. The actors say that despite the subject matter, that the set was quite jovial. And Pasolini would actually also feed the actors their lines right before the camera started rolling, so that's why some of the acting is strange at times, because they only knew their line right before they said it.
Yeah, and there's actually like a documentary of the making, and so
Hmm.
you can hear him like you can watch this film like where it looks like they're torturing people to death, and you hear him just shouting like, "Open your robe more, burn his penis, scream more!" Like,
So you've seen the documentary? I wasn't able to
yeah,
find it. Okay,
I
good.
found it. I'll send it to you because I found it on YouTube. It was like, um, yeah, chunks on YouTube. But I mean, another I think notable thing in terms of production is that Pasolini, like Fellini, didn't actually care about casting actors. He was like really invested in the aesthetic of the people in his films. And so one thing that I thought was very funny is like there's all of these numerical parallels in the film. So there's four old whores. There's the four daughters, and then there's the four studs, and then of course the four libertines, right? But and then there's there's supposed to be is there it's is it supposed to be nine of each of boys and girls, but then one of each dies before they get there?
Yes.
Yeah, so it ends up being like all these like fours, but for the studs like in Sade's Salo, like the whole thing. And Pasolini was like really upset because he couldn't find anyone that looked in the face the way that he wanted them to, but also had a giant cock. And so he just like in the end he was like it's this in this world like you have to pick one or the other. It's horrible. It's like you can't have everything. And he blamed it on progress. He was like, these days you can't like get,
What?
like, yeah. And and so he like cast these boys that he liked their faces basically and made them wear prosthetic penises so they look
Oh.
super hung.
Yeah, the dicks are huge in this movie.
Yeah, monstrous. Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
okay, so they're not real. Uh, I didn't know that. Uh, yeah, I mean, the other thing I want to say is that you are probably going to be better with all the characters in this movie. I had a really hard time following who was who, even after like multiple viewings of this movie. But sometimes you can tell because of the dick. So, but
Yeah, I mean, after watching this film many times, there's some characters where I'm like, okay, I've established who this is, but like I can never remember like, the libertines, like one is the president, one is like the minister of something, one is a
right.
bishop, and I can't keep them straight
That I
at
actually
all.
did manage to get,
Great.
but like and I do know the horrors names, but the collaborators and
Hmm.
sometimes have a hard time telling between the collaborators and the studs.
Hmm. And sometimes it's hard to tell between the collaborators and the victims when they're clothed, and I think that's or when they're not clothed, and I think that's very much on purpose
Yeah,
also.
that's a good point. And also the between the daughters and the female victims have a very hard time telling who is who.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, at the beginning,
oh,
yeah.
oh, I don't know anyone's names also.
Yeah, I mean some of them I remember their names just because I don't know why. Like there's one character who's named Fatima, and I think that that's really interesting because you know, I was like thinking about the history of Islam in Italy, you know, like, and
Oh,
she's like kind
interesting.
of the most of the victims. She's like the only one who is racialized, and she seems targeted in a particular way because she's scalped.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so and she's also the one that like the beardy guy pulls to pee on him.
Yes. Yeah. All right,
Anyway,
let's get into
this is
it.
just yeah, these are like little, you know, teasers for listeners.
Teasers.
What you have coming.
Yeah, for what's about to come.
Sabia que você inspira outras pessoas? Às vezes é difícil reconhecer o seu valor, mas eu tô aqui para dizer, você vale muito. L'Oréal Paris quer lembrar todas as mulheres disso, inclusive no cinema. Por isso, criou o Lights on Women's Worth Awards no Festival de Cannes, um prêmio que celebra as diferentes narrativas das mulheres no cinema e inspira outras, porque representatividade e reconhecimento são importantes. L'Oréal Paris, porque você vale muito.
A Max, seu streaming queridinho, veio aqui no seu podcast para saber. Você curte reality aventureiro ou prefere um conteúdo mais emocionante? Seja lá qual for seu preferido, tem na Max. Os realities que você ama, como Quilos Mortais, agora em versão 100% brasileira. E tem novidade, Sobrevivência Extrema vai ser o seu novo vício para maratonar. Tem Largados e Pelados, Masterchef, Operação Fronteira e muito mais conteúdo brazuca para ver. Vida real para todos os gostos é na Max.
The film opens with this kind of like banal pop music over the credits. I also noticed that the costumes are done by Danilo Donati, who I've mentioned before on this podcast, also did the costumes for Caligula. So that was significant to me.
Really?
Yeah, so he was around.
Yeah, the costumes are amazing.
Yes, yeah. The bibliography, there's also a bibliography at the beginning of every source that Pasolini is using in this film. I think it's like the only film I could think of that has a bibliography. And also Roland Barthes is cited in this bibliography, which was interesting because he kind of had an essay about why he didn't feel the film was successful in its attempt to talk about fascism. Simone de Beauvoir is on there, and Nietzsche. And now we open with the first part, which is the other thing we didn't mention is that the acts of this film are based on Dante's Inferno, which Pasolini believed Sade was trying to do in his book.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a very literary filmmaker.
Yes. Makes sense because he's also a writer.
Yeah.
And the first part is the Anti-Inferno. And we open in 1944 in the Republic of Salo, which is in northern fascist-occupied Italy. So that's very significant. And this group of 4 men is sitting at a table, and they're deciding something of great importance. And they're all signing off on this document. And these 4 libertines are the Duke, the Bishop, the Magistrate, and the President. And they are going to be the leaders, of this whole thing. One of them says, "All things are good when carried to excess," which is a direct Sade quote. Mm-hmm. And we now start to move into like more of the violence of the movie immediately. There's a group of young men dressed in Italian fascist uniforms, and they're chasing a group of male children. So basically what's happening is like all of these soldiers are rounding up local peasant children.
Actually, so they're not they're not peasants.
Okay.
So this is actually something, and so the first time that I saw this, I thought that they were the children of like leftist oppositions. Like I thought they were communist children.
Okay.
And one of them is, but they're actually all super bourgeois.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the reason that I thought that that was really interesting is because there's like this really fascinating thing in like this this like thread throughout Pasolini's poetry of like, you know, hating on the children of the bourgeoisie. And so I think that there's something particular because there's a scene where he like goes through and they're like, yeah, I've been like trying to get this one for years, you know, like his father's in this is in the um I don't know, Senate or whatever, you know, like
Yeah,
whatever it
he's
is.
a rival.
And yeah. And I think that like it feels very telling, particularly with the inclusion of their own daughters
Right.
in that uh, like that there's something like about generational violence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, yeah, that's what happens right after this is the men all agree to marry each other's daughters as the first step in this like debauched ritual that they're performing. And their soldiers, their guards, kidnap their daughters really roughly and like immediately are manhandling them and like spitting in their faces. And one of them even says, "I'm sorry, I was told to do that." And that's so he was told to do that by one of their fathers.
Right. Right. And
Um,
there's actually also there's 4 weddings in the film. Oh my God. This movie is laden.
yeah, it really is. There's just so, I mean, you could have an entire class on just this movie, honestly. Um,
Truly.
so yeah, that was the other thing when I was trying to get ready for this. I was like, oh my God, where do I even begin? It's like there's so much here. So all of these young boys are being lined up for inspection and examined, and that this is when I started to notice for the first time this really weird way that the boys are kind of like laughing at this predicament. Are they now picking who are they picking right now? The collaborators, the studs. Who do they pick first? Is it the victims?
They are the victims. Yeah, the
Okay.
collaborators and the studs are
They're
already
already
there.
there.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't see them being like recruited. They're, I mean, I think that there's like um an element of nihilism, particularly for the boys. Like, um the all the kind of like resistance that you see and the like crying and the like being upset is mostly from the girls.
Right.
Like it's the girls that like, you know, have the illicit love affair, who like say they can't take it anymore, who kill
Cry
themselves
out to
rather than
God.
going through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the boys are like, they laugh, they cry silently. There's
Yes.
about masculinity, and some of them like are kind of into it. A couple of them.
Yeah, and actually Pasolini said in this interview in Film Quarterly that he wanted to have victims that you can't sympathize with as victims. So that's part of the message here is like the complicity of the victims and yeah, like the boys really exemplify that, the way that they kind of like laugh the thing off, and it's just very strange and disturbing. And they're all immediately ordered to take their clothes off, so that we get like the first dicks of the movie. So this is when I started to also notice the way that the shots are. Like there's these weird shots that are through windows. Where there's no sound, so you're in the position of a voyeur looking in on this, which I found really interesting. Very much calls attention to the artifice of the film.
Yeah.
There's
a lot of there's also a lot of doorways and stairwells.
mm-hmm.
And mirrors as well. yeah, and I like the whole like palace that they're in. It's like super Art Deco,
Right.
and also like very like muted gray tones. You know, like everything feels like a set.
Yes. Yeah, and he did mention that in that interview as well. So there's now we get more inspection, and the girls are getting the same treatment, and that's when we see that now the four libertines are also being aided by these four aging women, these middle-aged uh sex workers, prostitutes. Yeah. um I don't, it feels weird to refer to these like evil women as sex workers. They're like,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't, that I know that that's like the better term, but they're four old whores.
Yeah. And I mean, they are, yeah, I mean, first of all, just in terms of like the characters, that's like how they're described in like Sade and also
Yes.
Pasolini.
Yes.
But also, yeah, they're heinous bitches. Like, you know, their job is to go and, I mean, they're sex traffickers, right? Their job is to go and procure like young virgins to be like tortured and murdered by rich, powerful men, and they are like delighting in it. And they are actually the instigators of a lot of the violence, because like their job is to tell stories to inspire these men to like new heights of sadistic creativity.
Yes.
And they're happy to oblige. And you know, it's also in these inspection scenes that you see like there's a girl that they're like really excited about, and then they realize she's missing a tooth.
Yes.
And so she's turned away, right? Because there's this fascinating thing where like they want to defile perfection, right? Like they want to start with like a perfect palette to be slowly destroyed.
Yes. And this is, so they're, let's break down the hierarchy of this situation a little bit. So there are the four libertines, then there are the four whores, then under them there are four studs who are chosen specifically because they have large dicks, and who are also, they also act as like guards, soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely like fascist soldiers.
Yes.
They're just fascist soldiers with giant penises.
Yes. And then there's also four collaborators. So those are younger men who are also delighting in this and participating in it. And then there are the 9 young men and the 9 young women. And then, of course, 2 of them die on the way. So then there's 8. So, also in this inspection scene, this is kind of important. One of the girls breaks down crying because her mother is dead, and everyone seems delighted by this.
Yeah, because her mother was killed in pursuit of her.
Yes.
Right, that they were trying to kidnap her, and her mother tried to protect her, and so they killed the mother.
Yes.
And everyone thinks it's hilarious.
Yeah, they love it. So everyone arrives at this palatial villa, with the teens in tow, and the 4 women, and the Duke, who is kind of almost like the leader of the 4 libertines, tells the group of young people that they're there to do whatever they ask of them, and that they are lowly and no one is coming to save them. So now this is when we start to get the rules of all of this. And if you disobey the rules as one of these young people, you get your name written in the punishment book. So at 6 a.m. every morning, everyone is to meet in the orgy room where these 4 women are going to tell tales and, like you said, inspire these men to new heights of depravity. The stories are supposed to turn them on and make them want to do all the fucked up stuff they do. They're also servants, and they're all people of color, and they are immediately kind of being menaced, shot at, and one of the studs makes eye contact with one of the maids, and they have a moment, and that will become significant later. So now we're in the Circle of Manias. That's like the true first part of all of this. And one of the whores, Signora Vicari, okay, I'm terrible at pronunciation. She's descending the stairs in a fabulous gown, and another woman is playing the piano, and she's telling a story about being molested as a child. And the first thing that happens is one of the men interrupts, saying the story isn't detailed enough. And Vicari goes on, and as this is happening, one of the men takes a boy into another room, and he returns moments later unsatisfied and raving, and the boy is crying, and he's frustrated and wants the boy to be punished. So this is kind of like the theme of how all of these meetings in the orgy room go. One of the women starts to tell a tale, and one of the four libertines gets turned on and tries to sexually assault one of the victims. So that's a common theme here. There's also a lot of talk in this scene about like the difference between a man and a woman's anus, and like sometimes a woman's anus just won't satisfy. The girls victims are like serving everybody food. One of them is immediately tripped by a guard.
It's the daughters, so that's how you know at the beginning it's just the four daughters.
Yes, yeah. So the four daughters, their rule is that they're always supposed to be naked at all times. So that's how you can distinguish between the daughters and the female victims, is that sometimes the female victims are wearing clothes, but the daughters are never wearing clothes. And she's immediately raped by one of the studs. And this is like such a bizarre scene too, because the president starts bending everybody over, he starts bending over and asking everybody to look at his ass. And then the stud who was raping one of the daughters then fucks him. And everybody sings a nationalist anthem. So which the song, I don't know actually.
Is this when they sing the Bridge of Parati?
Maybe.
It's so I think it is, because I don't remember another scene where they're singing.
Yeah, it probably is.
So on the Bridge of Parati, it's not a fascist song.
Okay.
And it's a song that apparently Pasolini really likes. But the like key line of the song is the best of youth is being buried. That's like, they sing that like over and over again. And it is like, it's like a sad song, I guess, about like war, but it's really about like this like sacrificing youth.
Okay, I wasn't getting the impression that it was fascist, but I was getting the impression that the song was patriotic in some way.
It definitely is like a patriotic song for sure. And is it in that scene where before that happens, there's like chatter on the radio that is like a Nazi broadcast, or is that at the next dinner scene?
That might be the next scene actually. But yeah, there's the radio comes up a lot in this movie.
Yeah.
So this is when one girl is found dead. Her neck is slit. So that's one down of the victims. And Signora Vicari tells a story about the next day in the orgy room. Tells a story about the first time she had anal sex. And the four libertines kind of wax poetic about fascism, say some very interesting things. So there's like this contest also of these two, like this young girl and this young boy. They're like, they want to see if they can come effectively. And one of the whores is like pleasuring the boy, and one of those soldiers is pleasuring the girl, or maybe it's vice versa. I don't know. There's a lot of like depraved shit that happens in this movie. And basically the outcome of this is that they end up having a mock wedding ceremony between the boy and the girl, Sergio and Renata, I believe, during which the Duke sexually terrorizes all the naked boys and girls in the room. And yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about weddings in this movie, because this is the second wedding. And what do you think about that? Like, what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to that quote that you had from Pasolini, where he's talking about like the tyranny of the heterosexual couple, right? That he is like satirizing that very intentionally through these weddings. The 4 weddings, the first is that the 4 libertines marry each other's daughters for the purpose of binding them together as family, even though 2 of them are already brothers. So they may or may not be marrying their nieces.
Right.
And the second wedding is these 2 children having proven that they basically proven their adult status through this forced coming. They are like, oh great, you're adults now you can get married and have sex. And they're like, oh, okay. And so they have this like weird mock wedding, and immediately they're like, all right, now you 2 have to have sex with each other, like touch each other.
Yes.
And they're all watching them, and they start to like cuddle a little and kiss. And as soon as they like actually start to touch each other
and get into it,
then the libertines respond with like total rage, and then they like run up and sexually assault then are fucking each other on top of them. So that's the first wedding. And I mean, I think that it begins to reveal a number of things. One is that, you know, the horror of the film is like literally in this like excess that is outside of desire or pleasure, right? That the horror of the film is like the never-ending rape of the film, right? That, you know, it's not a rape revenge film. Like no one gets their comeuppance in the end. It's just like endless violence. And whenever anyone expresses actual desire, it's responded to with violence, right?
Signora Vicari tells a story about another client from the past who used to make her act like a dog and play fetch. And then we see these naked boys and girls on leashes, forced to act like dogs and beg for scraps. They're kind of like bizarrely enthusiastic about it. There's a lot of push and pull in this film between like there's just no real grasp of anyone's actual inner psychology except maybe the 4 libertines. I don't know. It's just very like, I was very struck by how a person, like how the children just kind of like go along with everything. And this is kind of one of those instances. And one boy is also, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I think I was going to say probably what you were going to say, which is that like when we see moments of like assertion or resistance, it's again met with like extreme violence, right? So the one boy who's like, no, I'm like going to get up, immediately starts getting whipped, right? Quite terribly. And, you know, yeah, there's not like an out. It's very apparent from, you know, not just from the warning given to them that like no one cares about them and like, you know, there's no getting out, but just everything about the situation is hopeless.
Yes.
So I think that there's like another layer of hopelessness that we see, you know, like through I mean, we know when the film is set, but also, you know, there's these moments like one of the whores is like getting ready in a room, and she's like kind of looking out the window, and we don't see anything, but we hear the sound of planes. And there's these moments where we have these reminders that the world is burning around them, right? That like this is the final days of, you know, the fascist Italian German puppet state, right? Like,
Right.
And so even if they escaped, like, what are they escaping to?
It's a great
it's
point.
the end of the world,
right?
Like,
where are they gonna go? So, and yeah, I didn't even think about the sounds that are happening outside of the villa. And the radio also is a way that it serves to kind of remind us of the situation outside of these walls as well. What do you think is the significance of this being set at the end of all of fascist Italy and not the middle of it or the beginning?
I think what it is that it's a moment of the complete breakdown of normalcy, like that occurs towards the end of any, like in the desperation of the end of any totalitarian regime. And so you have this moment where like, you know, and fascism is less an ideology, right? Like there's nothing there's no inherent belief system around fascism except like violence and total power. And so my headphones are about to die.
Oh no.
Should I just take them off and talk at you?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Or
Is this okay also?
That's actually better. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay. All of the, you know, belief systems that Il Duce and, you know, the fascist party are kind of upholding in fascist Italy, like all of that is stripped away, and what's left is the spectacle of fascism, and that's just ultra violence, total power. You know, at some point, one of the like fascism is like the, what does he say? Fascism is the only real anarchism, right?
Yes.
Like that they, because everything has like broken down, they're able to enact their fantasy of the world because they have all of the power and it's their kingdom, right? Like it doesn't matter what anyone's doing anywhere else, even within Italy, because it's the end of the world.
Yeah, good point. And what are some of your thoughts? I mean, you were mentioning in the beginning of the relationship between Italy and Chile. What were you thinking? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I was thinking about it in a couple of ways. I guess the primary connection that I was thinking with Chile is that so this film came out in 1975, and it's this particular moment, not just of like a, you know, kind of explosion of like sexually violent film, and like a lot of these like Nazi exploitation films are from the 70s, like Night Porter, 1974, Ilse She-Wolf of the SS is 1975, and also Derek Jarman's Sebastian is 1976. But also like it's this moment of like intense counter-revolution. So like in 1973, there's the US-backed coup in Chile, the installment of the dictator Pinochet, and he, you know, is infamous for sadistic torture of young leftists and students, among many other people. But his regime had direct ties to neo-fascism in Italy, and a lot of like the fascist they borrowed a lot from fascist Italy. And so it's just kind of this like interesting historical parallel that has felt, I guess, just kind of is at the forefront of my mind because of the uprising that's happening in Chile. Where the current president, who is elected but is a right-wing president, has direct familial ties to the dictatorship. And the military has been mobilized against the people of Chile for the first time since and the news is like full of violence. So it just feels I don't know, kind of pressing.
Oh,
present.
absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, not to like be, the risk of being hyperbolic, like fascism is having a moment here as well. So obviously, yeah. So, I don't want to in any way equate like what's happening in Chile and Bolivia to what's happening here, but it is like obviously significant that we're having this zeitgeist.
And I mean, people are drawing those ties not just because what's happening in Chile and Bolivia is like directly tied to U.S. foreign policy and the impact that the U.S. has had on Central and South America, but also that Chileans are paying a lot of attention to what's happening in New York City because of the way in which police violence and fare hikes, particularly around public transit, have had such a huge impact in what's happening in terms of protests in New York and in Santiago, right? That like fare evasion is a huge part of like both movements,
Right.
So I think that there is a lot of like, it's not equating what's happening in these places, but thinking about transnational solidarity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, equating is in like the amount of like, just the amount of violence people are experiencing. Yeah.
Fewer people are losing eyes than in Chile.
Sorry, could you say that again?
I mean, I think that I said fewer people are currently losing eyes in New York than in Santiago.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think that it does like, because I study totalitarian states and I study violence, and I also am involved in BDSM and kink community. And I've had this conversation, like with Tina Horn, for example, about her comic Safe Sex, that you think about, the violence of these regimes, whether it's like the Italian fascist regime or Pinochet's dictatorship, and the like horrific torture that is enacted upon people, right? And it's like the kind of line between like fun fantasy and horrific torture is like the line of consent, but also then that becomes like twisted in this weird way when you're creating your own world in film, right?
Yes.
Like and so like one of the things that I really love about this movie is like that it makes you really confront that line, because like the line between like structural or systemic violence and desire in this really interesting way, because it's like they are, it's not in the film, it's not role play, it's like very real, but then it's fiction.
But and it's called attention to many times that it's fiction.
Yeah.
So because it's like you were saying, it's set up very much like a play. Like there's sets, there's the wooden quality of the actors as well. It's not like we're not going for, I mean, it's neo-realism in a lot of ways. We're not going for like true naturalistic depictions here. And yeah, then of course there is like just, I mean, the word sadism comes from the Marquis de Sade. And that's also a complicated thing because the Marquis de Sade was, you know, like a rapist. Like he was not doing consensual BDSM with people, but we still use the words sadism and masochism when we talk about kink. And yeah, I mean, it's like this movie, sadomasochism is a symbol here rather than being actually depicted. But then, of course, there are people in the movie who are enjoying the things that are happening, like you were saying earlier, some of the boys. So a lot of complicated questions about consent.
Yeah, because then, I mean, when we think about, like, so what is the consensual sex that happens in the film? There's the sexual relationships between the libertines and the studs, which are like, you know, I mean, consent seems complicated.
Yes.
But it seems more consensual.
Yeah, I guess the film is asking if consent even like exists in some ways. Yeah.
But then, so there's the relationship between two of the victims, the two girls, who are, you know, I mean, we actually don't know what happens to them because they like disappear. And I mean, the presumption being, you know, they all die. So
right.
One way or another. But then the relationship between the stud and
the bishop,
or no, sorry, not the stud, the collaborator and the servant. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's like the one like real consensual adult relationship in the film. And
that is based on like desire and not like a you know, like between the two girls, it's really a kind of about this experiencing this traumatic thing together and finding solace in each other. And the relationship between the servant and the collaborator is more of a relationship based on sexual desire.
Yeah. And they get ratted out.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's actually my favorite scene.
And are like summarily executed.
Yes. So now we get to the second act, because the Anti-Inferno is really like a prologue. The Circle of Manias is the first act. And then the second act, which is the Circle of Shit. And it is Senora Maggie's time to tell stories. And she tells the story of a client, John, who had once wanted to wear diapers and eat her shit. And she also talks about how she killed her mother. And the Duke says that there's no reason to love your mother and that he also killed his mother. And you know, we get like kind of the breaking down here of mainstream social relationships, like kill your parents, doesn't matter, nothing matters. And Eva, the girl from the beginning whose mother was killed, starts crying, and she is stripped swiftly and begs to be killed rather than raped, and begs God to save her. And the Duke is extremely excited by her fear and her pain. And he says, this whining is the most exciting thing I've ever heard. And he then takes a shit on the floor and forces her to eat it. And he also says that because she called on God, that her name has to be written in the punishment book. So imploring God is against the rules. What do you think of that?
That imploring God is against the rules?
Yeah, like what's up with the, you know, the rejection of God?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that's interesting, you know, the libertines are representatives of church and state, right? Like one of them is a bishop, and there is like a kind of like constant like pillaring by them of like all of the institutions of the state and of the church, and like they, you know, part of their like absolute power is like they are replacing all of these structures of power, and that includes God, right? Like they are God,
right,
in their kingdom, and so calling on God becomes blasphemy within their like you know, I mean, like fascism is already extreme, but like within their extremist fascism,
yeah,
like that's a no-go.
Yeah. And
offense.
yeah, I mean, it was just interesting to me that that was a major offense to like reference God in any way when one of these men is a bishop, supposedly. But I guess that also goes back to this idea of like church and state, and the church being a authoritarian figure and it not really being about God at all. So there's also a criticism here of Catholicism itself. So the prostitute, Signora Maggie, continues her corpophagia tale. And the president is so turned on that he leaves the room to masturbate. I have a note here that's like, why even leave the room at this point? Like,
it is a little unnecessary.
Right. This is when we like get into the really, really hard part of this movie. I mean, if it wasn't hard enough, like forcing a girl to eat shit. And because the woman, Signora Maggie, is telling the story about like this man who like collected everybody's shit in a vat to eat it. And the president says, oh, we must do that at once, as soon as possible. So the libertines are now sitting around in their like office and they're talking about installing a large tub in the bathroom to collect everybody's feces. And no one is to shit by themselves in their chamber pot anymore. So even that is taken away from them. And the president goes to the boys and girls quarters to make sure that no one is shitting in their chamber pots, and one girl has and is reprimanded, and one of the boys has too, but he's kind of like cheeky about it. He's like, what, so what are you gonna do? Whereas the girl was like obviously very scared. So that kind of goes back to what you were talking about the difference between their reactions. And they both have their name written in the Book of Punishments. So now we get the third wedding, where one of the boys is dressed in a wedding dress for this mock wedding, and we're at this horrible wedding dinner feast, and there's a huge pot full of shit being served to all of the guests, and it's fucking nauseating. Really hard to watch. I read that the actual food that they used to make the shit wasn't great either. Like, it was like a bunch of food that they just like mushed together to make it brown and then like shaped it. And
yeah, I definitely read somewhere that it was like they were like it was chocolate and other stuff.
Right. Yeah, and like the actor said, yeah, it's not like it tasted much better than actual shit either. So now they're served all of this excrement, and everybody's got to eat it, and it is. Yeah, everyone's eating it. One of the men is like, "Eat, my dear bride," to the boy who's dressed as a bride, and one of them says, "Nothing is worse than breath without odor." And one of the girls says, Eva, I can't go on. So the girls are, you know, at this point, like, just
they're
losing
done.
it.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, just to like paint a picture, you know, this is like a banquet hall with like silver and china, and the girls are wearing these like cute little dresses that are like sheer white. Like schoolgirl dresses.
Yeah.
So you can, like, yeah,
They're
like
so, the dresses are so cute. Yeah.
So cute. Like, and you know, the boy that he's marrying is wearing this like horrific bridal dress with like a veil. And this is the scene where, you know, like there's like a Nazi radio broadcast playing in the background, just like kind of casually. And it actually reminds me of my favorite Italian word from, you know, I mean, the only Italian word I know probably from this movie, which is mangia, which like they're like mangia.
I know.
They were constantly telling people to eat things, to eat shit, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple more things with shit that happen in this movie. Like, and I know I keep asking you questions, and it's because you're just so much more knowledgeable about this than me. What do you think about shit in Salo? Like, what is the role of human excrement? I mean, a thing I immediately go to, of course, is the abject.
Yeah, and I mean, that's actually on my list of questions for you. Yeah, there's a couple pieces, you know, I mean, like, I of course want to assert, like, a lot of the thoughts that I have on the film are just like my hypothesis, you know, like,
no, of course, yeah.
Film scholars are like rabbis, right? Like, you know, fill a room, everyone has a different opinion, but just like rabbis. But yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, you know, the like Pasolini is inheriting from Sade. Right. And I mean, I really think that there's like nothing that like fucks with like bourgeois propriety than being covered in shit.
Right. Like, yes.
It's just,
it's the ultimate. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, you know, the only like allowable sex in their world is anal sex. Like,
right.
It's all about assholes and poop and and you know, it's like delighting in filth.
Yeah.
And you know, if it was consensual and not fascist, it might be, you know, kind of delightful.
Well, the interesting thing is, what'd you say?
Fully disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fucking awful. Like, I can watch a lot of stuff, as we know, but
yeah,
this, even I had a hard time watching this.
Yeah, no, I very rarely like gag when I'm watching films,
mm-hmm.
and it's like I am a sympathetic gagger, so like when Divine eats like the dog shit at the end of Pink Flamingo, I definitely like get a little like
yeah.
Like, but yeah, like I had two kind of gaggy moments this week because of you. One was the cook, the thief, his wife and her lover at the end when he throws up while he's trying to eat the body, and then in this one when they're like shoving poop in their mouths and it's like smearing on their faces.
It's
like,
so awful.
You know, they're just like really getting in there, like squishing it around, and like the close up on the plate, and I was just like
it's so awful. I, full disclosure, have only read parts of 120 Days of Sodom. I've read some of his other books, like I've read Justine. But yeah, I mean, shit comes up a lot in those books. And the kind of, I mean, Sade and Pasolini are existing in such real, like, turbulent political times. I mean, Pasolini, like, living through fascism, and Sade kind of rooting for the French Revolution, but it didn't really do him any good because he was, one of the people that was locked up during the French Revolution and afterwards. And he was like, a lot of people feel like Sade was skewering Enlightenment ideas and national identity in his work. Given that, I mean, he was also doing the things he was writing about, so he was obviously interested in it more than purely as satire. But then he's using these really disgusting images and Pasolini as well, to reveal this, like, naked interior and strip everything away, and everything becomes just about power and pain. And it's, the abject is this idea of, like, you have to cast something off in order to live, but everybody in this film, the libertines in this film, are embracing the abject so that it becomes not abject. Anyway, I mean, yeah, shit in film always has to be related back to the abject.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, like, you mentioned his, like, skewering of Enlightenment and nationalism, and, like, Pasolini has written about, and also a lot of scholars of fascism have written about, like, the Enlightenment is a prerequisite for fascism, right? Like, there cannot be this, like, extreme nationalism without, this, like, first step towards that.
Right.
And so this thing I think is, like, whatever that Enlightenment thinkers think is, like, saving Europe or whatever, or is like, a great step in a positive direction, as really, like, leading us towards this, like, extreme violence
and eugenics and all that.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah. And, like, and I mean, I'll probably want to talk more about that when we actually get to the scene with the summary execution of the servant girl. But yeah, I think that, like, the thing about Sade and the thing about Pasolini is that, like, it is kind of hard to tell, because, like, Sade, like, he was, like, into it, like, these were his fantasies. It wasn't, just satire, just, like, political or whatever. And I think that, like, there's a lot of stuff in Salo that, like, Pasolini is including because he wants to look at naked boys. He, like,
yes,
like, that's why there's so much of it. Like,
right. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the role of women is so strange in both Sade and Pasolini. I mean, women are kind of more symbols to both of these men than they are really any kind of real person. Just like kind of how the daughters are symbols of, God, how do you even say it? The daughters are the daughters of these fascists, and it's the symbol of these, like, evil men's, the fruit of their loins, and how they'll abuse even them. They have no qualms about abusing anybody.
But I think it's interesting that it's not, like, the daughters are not the escalation, they're the origin point, right? Like, the abuse starts in the family.
Yes.
Which is just accurate. So
it is just accurate, yeah.
Yeah,
it's not like, oh, you abuse everybody else and then you start abusing your family. That's the last resort. No, it always starts there. So that's very, very prescient. So then Signora Maggie tells another story about a man who wanted to eat her shit right before he died. The Duke drags a girl, Fatima, into another room and tries to force her to piss in his mouth. And after she's done, it's really funny. She says, "There, I've finished." Like,
she's like, it's not coming, and then
Yeah.
she's like, okay, I'm done. Like,
yes. And
it's hard to pee on command.
it is hard to pee on command. The other interesting thing is like how the libertines indulge just as much in the disgusting things that they are forcing their victims to do, like drink piss and eat shit. Like, they are reveling in it. It's not solely sadistic. It's like they also enjoy it. So then Senora Maggie is telling more stories about shit while dancing around, and they decide to judge a contest who has the best ass of all the victims. And the Duke and the Bishop have this philosophical argument about whether the act of the sodomite or that of the executioner is more absolute, which is interesting. And all the boys and girls are like told to get on the floor with their asses in the air, and they're getting judged. And the men quibble about if boys or girls have better asses. I mean, like, there's like moments of bizarre humor in this film too. Like, oh, look at these grown men arguing about like who has a better ass, which is just completely bizarre. A boy named Francino is picked as having the best ass, and one of these soldiers goes to shoot him, but it's a false alarm. There's no bullets. And the bishop says, "Fool, how could you believe I'd kill you? Don't you know I'd want to kill you 1,000 times?"
Yeah. And I think that's the like horror of the humor, right? That it's like, it's banal. Like, that, you know, they're like, oh, ha ha ha, who has the best ass? Oh, like, your prize for having the best ass, we're going to kill you.
Yes.
And you know, the kid is like in abject terror. Like,
Yeah.
he knows he's going to die. Like, they're holding him still with a gun to his head, and he's like begging for his life, and then there's no bullet in the gun.
Yes.
Like,
and they,
ooh.
yeah, it's funny to them. And this idea of like wanting to kill someone 1,000 times is also just horrific. Senora Maggie again tells one more story about a man who only wanted to eat the shit of women who have been condemned to death. So this goes back to your point where you were saying that the four horrors are instigating, like, upping the ante of violence, and they know that the men are going to want to do the things that they talk about. So now they've introduced this concept of killing your victims. Mm-hmm. So now we get to the circle of blood. And the first thing we see is 3 of the 4 men, the president, the magistrate, and the Duke, and they're dressed in drag. So I don't know, like, what is the
like auntie drag?
It's auntie drag, yeah. It's not like sexy drag.
Yeah, they're like dressed as like respectable Italian church women.
Yes, exactly. And the role of drag in this film, like, what do we think of that? That happens a couple times. It's, you know, because we're talking about misogyny here.
It's misogyny.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's truly, I mean, I think it's just like deep misogyny.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like mocking femininity at every turn, like replacing women, you know, like women don't need to exist because the family is unnecessary, and you know, like, children, obviously they don't care about their children. Their wives, like their original wives before they marry their daughters, unclear where they are, right? Like,
and probably killed them.
Yeah, you know, or they're like shopping somewhere, like, who knows?
Yeah.
They're in Milan, like, and they you know, they're like good enough with their gaping assholes,
yeah,
and their church lady hats.
Yeah.
And so they're engaging in this like farcical marriage with the studs, you know, with their like 10-inch cocks, and they exchange these like giant costume jewelry rings, and the bishop who also has a sexual relationship with one of the studs, he is wearing this like bizarre, like kind of like Church of Satan looking,
yes,
like this sheer like it's not even salmon, it's like a
it's red, right?
yeah, it's like a pink red, it's like sunset or something. Like I don't know, this like weird robe with these like, they're not real ram skulls, they're like paper mache like ram skulls,
yes,
and like this like weird
mirror headdress.
Yeah, it looks like they like repurposed like an Art Deco lamp or something.
Yeah,
but, like
it's just a complete mockery of the whole thing.
So bizarre. Yeah, 100%. Is this the wedding where they have the calla lilies, or is that the first wedding?
I think that's the first wedding, because every victim is holding a lily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which of course is like, you know, a death flower. But...
Right. Yeah, that costume is like insane. The bishop is wearing, and right, you know, it's almost kind of like positioning femininity as like in the realm of the bourgeois almost. And yeah, it's just like, it's a mockery of heterosexuality, which, you know, I can sort of get behind.
And yes, that's the thing. It's like, it's a mockery of heterosexuality at the expense of women.
Right. Yeah.
That's the difference. Like,
yes. Which is very, I mean, honestly, a huge problem with gay men still. So.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Like,
yeah.
I mean, you know, and that's the thing. Again, it's like, what is the like seed of truth, right? Like, I remember, I mean, this is like harkening back to years ago, but like, I went to this talk by Jack Halberstam where he was like, oh yeah, British lesbians, they got really into fascism because they loved uniforms. And I was like, okay, but like, where is the line between liking uniforms and being a fascist, right? Like, you can, like, once you're a fascist, right?
Right. No coming back from that.
Yeah. So, you know, like, for all of this, it's like, so Pasolini, like, how do you feel about women?
Right. Yeah.
There's a question. Yeah. I almost want to be like, hey, listeners, tweet in. Do you know how Pasolini felt about women?
No, I mean, honestly, do it, because there's like so much going on here. It's hard to talk about it all in one episode. So this is definitely an ongoing conversation. Tweet at us about your thoughts about Pasolini and women. It just is like so triggering and like reminds me of all the times that gay men have told to me like, oh, you know, I have a complicated relationship with women because I was like forced to like them growing up and now I just have a hard time with women. And I'm like, cool. That's extremely fucked up, but it's very common. And yeah, I've definitely thought about that while I was watching this. And also just like how women are raped in this movie. I mean, the boys are sexually violated, but the women are straight up. Am I projecting? I feel like the women are raped more in this movie.
No, there is more violence directed at the girls,
right?
And I mean, again, it begins with the daughters, right? Like, I think that you know, I mean, certainly, you know, not to downplay the violence that all of them face, but it does seem like there is like a particular cruelty that is saved for the girls, and it is like a cruelty that is out of like real hatred,
right,
of women,
right? Yeah. Oh, and the two girls on the sidelines kiss during the ceremony and they're reprimanded for it. And now they're having that mock wedding with the studs, and Then we see that the bishop is having sex with one of the studs in the most joyless sex scene ever filmed.
They fall off the bed,
Yeah.
and it's like really perfunctory.
Yes.
But also, again, like with the giantest cock, like
huge.
It's so funny because there's like a scene where, so at the end of that sex scene, like the bishop is like walking out of the room, and you like kind of, the POV is like kind of from the stud, and so you like, who also has like a giant zit on his cheek, which I couldn't stop looking at. But so the bishop is like walking out, and I like fully expected there to be like just a little blossom of blood on the back of his like white robe.
Right.
This man just had like definitely lubeless, like with like a monster cock, and I don't know how he's walking.
Yeah. I thought the same exact thing. And he looks like he's in actual pain when the guy is like fucking him. That's why I was like, this is the most joyless sex scene ever.
Yeah. Because it is like all of the libertines, like, I mean, even when they're like reveling and eating shit, like the whole time I'm like, none of them actually like this. They like the idea of it. The whole thing that they're getting off on is the excess. It's like that framing line at the beginning. Like the whole point is to like take it to the next level over and over and over again. It has nothing to do with actually being interested in or turned on by, or like, you know, they're not actually, I think, excited by any like one thing in and of itself.
That's a really good point, because it kind of goes back to how during the orgy room scenes where the prostitutes are telling the stories, the men have to like over and over again, like, you know, grab someone and like try to jerk off, and it's kind of like always unsuccessful, and that shows that, yeah, no one's really having like a great time here. It's not like, yeah, it's more about like the symbol of it than it is about the actual acts. So the stud dresses the bishop in like this gun holster and white robe and slippers, and he enters the boys' chamber, and one of the boys tells him Graziella is breaking the rules because she keeps a photo under her mattress. So the bishop goes to Graziella and demands the photo, and it's a photo of a young man, presumably her boyfriend. And she says, if you spare me, I'll show you what Eva and Antoniska do to obey your rules. And then to do disobeying your rules. And Graziella shows the bishop that Eva and Antoniska are having an affair. And that's against the rules, obviously. So the bishop pulls a gun on them. But Eva says, if you kill me, I can't tell you what I know. Every night, Ezio visits the Black Maid. And everyone is like selling each other out, which is this very kind of comical chain of, you know, there's no loyalty in this group, like, which is very obviously, of course, how fascism works. People selling each other out. And the libertines burst in on one of the collaborators, Ezio, and the maid having sex. And they
Maid get a name? I don't think she has a name.
She does not have a name, no. And they pull their guns on them, and they're taken aback because Ezio raises his fist in a socialist salute.
Yeah, they like fully are like physically taken aback.
Yeah.
Like, they stop for like and are just staring.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the first time in the movie that they're like really taken aback by anything. And they riddle him with bullets, shooting him even after he's dead. And they also kill the maid. So yeah, I mean, this relationship between Ezio and the maid is also very significant. And yeah, I mean, like, you have any thoughts about this scene? It's a hard one.
And so I mean, I kind of want to give the maid a name, which I mean, like, obviously the character is unnamed, but the actress is Inez Pellegrini, and she's an Eritrean Italian actor. And you know, I think that the presence of all of the servants, who are all people of color, right? It's a direct result of Italian colonization of Eritrea, Libya, and Somalia, and also the occupation of Ethiopia, all of which were like extremely violent colonial projects. In Libya, under Italian colonization, 1/10 of the Libyan population was killed. 250,000 Ethiopians were murdered during Italian occupation. So, you know, there was like this brutality, as well as intense racism under fascism, right? And so, like, Italian racism looked different than, for example, Nazi racism, particularly at the beginning of the fascist part. For example, like, anti-Semitism was not a huge part of fascism, of Italian fascism. That really came in later as Mussolini started cozying up to Hitler. There were like prominent Jewish members of the fascist party, but anti-Black racism was a super intense part of Italian fascism. And so I think that, like, there's significance to sort of including that colonial history in a way through the body of the maid. And I'm like kind of using the word body really intentionally, because if like colonies are so often represented by like the naked and rapeable bodies of women of color, and that's like what the maid is like supposed to be, but it's like subverted by her consenting participation. That, you know, like when they like first look at each other, her and the boy, what's his name again? It's like
Ezio.
I keep wanting to call him Enzo. Ezio. You know, like they're looking at each other, right? It's not he's looking at her, or like their eyes meet, and that's why it's like the ultimate crime, right? And that's also like, I think, the two of them, like, they represent like the real threat. It's like the threat of miscegenation, the threat of decolonization, the threat of socialism. Like, it's all kind of contained in this like very short scene. And they're not like, there's no such thing as like there's no character development in this movie. Like, it's not like we like get to know their love. It's like literally they have two scenes: the scene where they look at each other and the scene where they're fucking and then they die.
Right.
So, but like, I do think there's a lot there. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, I think the way that you put it is perfect, and I appreciate you using the actress's name. And it's, yeah, I mean, that's exactly sort of what I was thinking of, is like of this idea of racial purity. It's very significant that he uses the socialist salute. I guess there's like this equation of, of the left with this project of larger project of racial equality. And yeah, it's I find this chain of events, like the chain of them telling on each other and then this death, to be, beyond the shit eating, like the most disturbing part of the movie. Just because it's the only time that anybody is given any actual character development, quote unquote. And it's just the most hopeless kind of situation. So the next day, the boys and girls are all lined up, and some of their names are being read, and that they're told that whoever is made to wear the blue ribbon can only imagine what's in store for them, and the rest, if they agree to collaborate, can go to Salo with the 4 men and become collaborators with them, which like fascism is about to end. So it's kind of like a Italian fascism is about to end.
Yeah. I mean, do they know that? Hard to say.
It's hard to say. Yeah, that was actually another one of my questions was like, do they know that the end is coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think by this point, like Mussolini has already like been captured, but then like freed by the Germans. Like I think that they should know that the end is there. But I will say I know less about like the about Italy than about Germany, and like the desperation with which like Nazi Germany clung to the idea of victory is like not realistic is like a understatement.
Yeah.
Literally like the like the Russian troops were like we won, and they're like, but did you? Because we're gonna have 1,000-year Reich.
Right.
And they all just snorted another line of cocaine and said, let's send our children into war.
Yeah. Which is not unlike things now. Like, yeah, so that's depressing. To say the least. So
never underestimate cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance and like the absolute insanity of fascists.
It's ideology. It's like, I mean, it doesn't rely on reality to exist.
Right. So Signora Maggie tells the story of a man of about 40 with a huge dick who likes to gather 15 women and have them shit in his mouth, and then he brands them and kicks them in the behind through an open window into a cellar where each of them is tortured in a horrible way. Also interesting that all of the horrors stories revolve around female victims and male perpetrators, but in this world, boys and girls are victims. So I found that interesting, and I was also wondering what that was about. I don't know if I have an answer. I just thought it was worth noting. So we then see that there's like some boys and girls are being made to sit naked, tied up in a vat of excrement, and one of them cries out, "God, why have you abandoned us?"
And that's one of the daughters.
Yeah. And some of the collaborators, the boys, are sitting around playing cards while that happens. Very obvious what that's kind of alluding to. And the Duke is now this is when we get the death scenes. And the Duke is watching, they're all in robes, the four libertines, because they have these kind of like leather underwear underneath. And the Duke, they all take turns sitting in this chair.
This is like what I imagine.
What'd you say?
Sorry. I said, this is what I imagine like straight kink parties are like.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. Like, just gross men in leather underwear.
Imagining, torturing teenagers to death.
Yeah. The Duke watches, so they're all going to take turns like sitting in this chair and watching them torture their victims outside this window in this courtyard. So the Duke is first, and he's watching, and we see all the torture through the lens of his binoculars. And some of the boys and girls are being tortured now in like various ways in the courtyard, like their dicks are burned with candles, for instance. One of the women who has not spoken, the pianist, the woman who just plays the piano while they tell stories, jumps out of a window and commits suicide. So, cannot handle having been complicit in all of this. The Duke watches as one of the boys gets his tongue cut out, and he says, "Good, you were ready." And a bunch of the girls are raped, hung. the president also watches, and they just take turns like watching the torture. Like somebody gets their eyes gouged out. One of the girls is scalped. And some of the victims are branded on their breasts and their nipples. There is some really solemn music playing on the radio, but one of the collaborators, the young boys, switches the radio and it turns to like very typical dance music, slow dance music. And two of the boys, the collaborators, slow dance together. And one of them asks, "What's your girlfriend's name?" And the other one says, "Margarita." And then the film ends.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Last line of the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I was thinking, those murder torture scenes at the end. It's like the opposite of Giallo. Like there's no blood.
Oh.
Well, there's a little bit
with the scalping.
Yeah, but like I was watching them, like when the guy gets his tongue cut out, it's the boy with the most perfect ass. The tongue,
Franchino,
yeah, like the tongue is like so clearly fake. And there's like no blood, and they're like sawing into it, but it's not actually like cutting.
Right.
And having watched it, like, and it is, the whole cumulatively, it's very disturbing. But like having watched it a number of times, this round, I like could really enjoy the like terrible special effects makeup, like. So that made it like a little bit, maybe at this point or by that point in the film, I was just like grasping at like any out of like, really processing what was happening. But I was like, man, that's a weird tongue.
Oh, the tongue. Yeah. And I remember also that image is a lot of like covers of the movie. Like I remember seeing that image.
Yeah.
And with the title of the movie.
Like the headlock, and there's like so many hands on him, and he just like, that actor has a really good I'm in terror face.
Yeah,
like,
he's one of the best in the movie.
It's true.
Yeah. The torture scene is, by the time it comes, everything has already been so horrific that you're like, oh my God, let's get this over with. Like it's not even like that shocking at the end. It's like, this is the logical conclusion to everything that has been happening. What do you think of the final scene?
I don't know. So I actually, like, this is the big question for me, and it's a question every time I watch it. Like, I find like, I guess I'm not so jaded that I don't find like same gender slow dancing like beautiful, and I'm like, and like very precious. So like these boys are dancing, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so sweet.
It is cute in a way.
Yeah, it's like weirdly cute, and they're dancing in front of this like wall of brutalist abstract like fascist art. There's like an iron cross, like and everyone is dead. And then the last line is so strange to me, like that, if like in a way the whole project of Salo has been to like birth this new world of excess, where like the only remaining, the only ones left alive are like collaborators, like there's still this like weird innocence and this weird like return to normalcy almost immediately that like is like, was this all like a children's game? I don't know. I have no idea what to do with it. I'm like, and where's Margarita? What's she up to? Well,
what's she up to? I guess
her boyfriend is like out being rapey.
I guess the way I thought of it was like this weird return to normalcy that these guys think is going to happen after this is done. And like, we know that that's not going to happen because World War II ends. But yeah, I guess I was sort of like, they're thinking of this as just part of what you do in this regime. You just listen to what these guys want you to do, and you do it, and then you go back to your life. And again, like the banality of it all, and also this moment that the two boys have is, you know, like how the two girls were finding comfort in each other, like they're finding comfort and friendship in each other and warmth. That there's only a few moments of actual any warmth in this movie, and it's, you know, when the two girls are together, the dancing between the two boys, and perhaps the relationship between Ezio and the maid, and it's just a very, I mean, there was I read that there was a bunch of different endings to this movie, and then that was the one that Pasolini ultimately decided on. So
yeah, I think it's so, you know, it's like we don't return to the libertines, like we don't see them again. It's such a intense contrast to, you know, all of these kids who are the same age as the collaborators, right? And who, you know, at times it's like confusing who is who. You know, they're all being tortured to death, and then the two boys just like they share a moment.
Yeah, it adds to like the entire surreal nature of this film. Do you have any closing thoughts on Salo? I mean, like we could go on and on, but
oh my god, yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, I think that like maybe my closing thought will be this, like maybe I'll just note, I guess, the some of the qualities of fascism.
Oh yeah, so, go for it.
Italian fascism, like there was a system of corporatism, so they were super like anti-union, anti-worker, but they did this by like sort of like killing all the like leftist unionists and then incorporating unions into the state. And so like everything was about like collaboration. Everything is with, you know, Mussolini was like, everything is within the state, everything is for the state, and nothing is against the state. Like, so that's the like total power of fascism. But then there's this really great book that I suppose I would recommend called The Anatomy of Fascism by Robert Paxton. And he talks about fascism as like being about like violent action, anti-intellectualism, rejection of compromise, contempt for established society, and like a love of the liberating and vitalizing qualities of speed. And, you know, I was just like, oh, right. So it's, you know, it's not about any belief system. It's just about like ritual, rhetoric, ceremony, you know, uniforms. And then I was like, cool, right. I knew this before, but fuck, we live in fascist America.
This movie kind of gets bandied about as a film that explores sadomasochism, but I really don't see it as doing that.
No, it's not. It's not an S&M film
at all, and it gets put on lists of like S&M films, and I find that to be really, really inaccurate because it's not about S&M. It's about straight up torture and fascism. So
there's, but there is no masochism.
No. Okay. So where can people find you on social media?
Oh, I am at JB Brager on everything. So just my name.
Follow them. They're amazing. Like, you know, you do so many different things, and you're just an amazing person, and people should follow you. So go do that. And you know where to find me. Girls Guts Giallo on everything. Patreon.com. If you're still listening to this long ass episode, patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And you can find me there. Bonus content, as become a subscriber, all that, whatever, talking points. I'm completely shot after talking about this movie.
I'm like totally loopy. go give your money to queer horror podcasts.
Go.
All of it.
Yeah, and I'm emotionally exhausted. Definitely gonna go do some self-care after this. And thanks again, JB, and I'll see y'all next week.